Join us as we delve deep into determining if someone has converted a new patient.
Hello, Dean DePice.
And Jen DePice.
Here to serve more conversations, that we would dig deeper in the midst of the conversations we're in, then become more spread out and dilute in a number of multitudes of things that we're not really looking at deeply. And today's conversation that you wanted to talk about is
on growing our conversions with new people in our practices.
Yeah. So right away, when Jen and I started to converse on this, right away, I qualify things with a lot of questions. I said, conversions. So some people claim they have conversions and they don't qualify what equals a conversion. Some people have a conversion, but the conversion isn't a converted relationship. In other words, many times when people seek a chiropractic facility, in their initial reflex, they're seeking something different. But then as soon as they get to the place that they were pursuing, they're right away going back to their old habits, which is, how do I use this new thing to just get out of comfort, get out of discomfort in a new way? And they don't really want to convert their lives. They don't want to change their behaviors. They don't want to evolve their thinking. They don't want to elevate their choices and actions. So they're not really converting to anything. So some of us have very high conversions, but people aren't paying money. Some people have very high conversions, but they're not really committing to shift their behaviors in life. So I came up with a lot of questions. Well, what do you mean converting? I mean, can we qualify the conversation of new patients converting to care?
Yeah. It's really important that we have standards.
Standards.
And I love that in our community in TLC, we have criteria for someone to determine that a person is a new patient.
Right.
And that's really important because it's unequivocal. And when we have a standard that everybody agrees to abide by, then we really can make a comparison of different practices and how you were practicing a year ago versus how you're practicing 2 years from now. So I appreciate that having the standard of what are those criteria for somebody to be converted.
I always like to bring things back to the most definitive living rooms that people make choices from, and that's usually parents raising children. They have very clear beliefs on how their kids have to behave, what they want for their kids, what they don't want for their kids. So if you have a child that's made a poor decision, let's say they're young, they got their license and they were caught driving drunk or something, well, what's your standard for them to convert in their decisions for the future? Because a child could say, yeah, okay, I won't drive and drink. Well, that's converted, all right? They said the words that said they agreed to never do it again. Well, is that converted? And would you stop at that point? Would you create no criteria? Would you have no thresholds by which they have to conduct themselves for the next 6 months to a year to prove their elevated ways? If it's your children, hopefully you set standards, you have criteria, you have means by which you go back and measure and you analyze and you look out for them. Well, aren't all people each other's children in one moment or another? Right? In each moment, one of us is leading a exchange and another of us is following. And in a moment later, it could flip roles. But we are all here to be our brothers and sisters' stewards, right? And vice versa, and one step at a time. So a new patient converting in a chiropractic facility to the choice of chiropractic care has to have standards to it. But the umbrella conversation is elevating people's conversion of new patients. And in order to, in fact, elevate, we need to do an actual analysis of what we have in our house now. When you presently call someone converted, what are the standards? And I don't know if you want to get into that. But.
Well, I do want to get into that because I appreciate that in TLC, those criteria are very clear and we work backwards, right? We want them to be a converted or accepted new patient that chooses lifetime care. So then we have to work backwards to our new patient phone call and their day one experience. What are we doing that leads up to that decision?
I'm challenged already starting this conversation because most people don't want a deep conversation. They want a very quick, superficial practice management. Let me just throw a procedure at something, sign up for the latest thing. I think I want to read a new book. I need a new book. Is there a new book? It's the same discipline. We must go back and truly live examined lives.
Well, you bring up the obvious point that most people want to tune into something, to hear something quick, and then just think that they can do that one thing, and then that's going to fix their practice.
Right.
And the reality is, you tuned into this podcast in our community because you know that there's something different.
Yeah.
There's something that's attractive about a TLC model that grows depth of relationships with longevity, with a sustainable model, with systems in place that produce that longevity.
Yeah.
So, you're here for a reason, and it's because we're different.
Right.
Just like you want to attract people to your chiropractic practice, they're looking for something different. And there's a lot of people that are looking for something different. So I love that you choose to stay in this conversation with us, because you recognize that maybe what you've been doing is successful, and you recognize there's probably more people you could help if they stayed under care a little bit longer in order to get the ideal results.
Yeah, for their sake. We are going to lead a civilization that has higher clinical outcomes when we help them be people who realize the virtue in slowing things down. All right? We are not trauma care units. And I know there's chiropractors out there that are, you might flip this off right now just because we're going to talk about treating on day one, and like, oh, there's one of those practice management groups going to get you done. No, I would urge us, let us in fact have a dialogue, all right? If someone shows up in your office because they tell you they've had an acute neck pain flare-up or an acute low back flare-up, and we jump into an exam, and you happen to be someone that has some form of clinical testing in addition to orthopedic, neurologic, chiropractic tests, you do radiographs or some other medium like that, 9 out of 10 times, what amount of chronicity, of chronic problems do we tend to see evidenced on radiographs?
Almost everyone.
Almost everyone.
Almost everyone.
So if they have an acute presentation that is in fact an acute flare-up where they say it just started hurting 3 days ago, if you look deeper and say, has it ever flared up in the past?
Right. Well, the reality is that the symptom shows up at the end after the body's been adapting or maladapting.
So these people have had issues, most of them for many years, but now they're showing up with a flare-up, which means it's not a exclusively acute issue. It is an acute presentation of an underlying chronic debilitation.
And I love that you're making the parallel, because that's what many chiropractors or people do in their own life, not just their physical health. Right?
Yep.
It's a chronic condition that hasn't been attended to on a regular basis or nurtured.
People saying at the end of the year, I owe the IRS what? You can't live in America and be surprised by the amount you're going to owe on taxes unless you choose to let things go underlying unaddressed. So we urge all of you in all areas to live a proactively aware address of all matters. So getting back to the patient. So they're not acute in exclusivity. They might be an acute presentation of an underlying chronic condition. If that's the case, then you feeding into their previously broken responses, which have led to this situation, means by speeding things up to some measure, you're making the course of their problems worse. Because you're allowing the perpetuation of that expedient pursuit at the cost of deep understanding. So I would urge us to consider that we at least have a 2-day process. So we, first and foremost, slow things down. And it's harder to convert people. It's more work to slow things down, right? Ironically, to go slower is harder.
And that's why we train in TLC with systems, so that we can optimize that time and have the greatest depth of connection with people.
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of work.
You're not randomly slowing things down. You're very functionally, productively, and constructively slowing things down. So in any case, in day one, if you say to them, do you want the exam? I mean, that's a point of converting long-term care right there, because on day one, before you're agreeing to care, they're proclaiming agreement to wanting the exam. So we don't just proceed to exam, because you could easily say, and there are doctors that do say, well, of course they want the exam. That's why they came here. I didn't hear you say, yes, I want the exam. All right. And so, at TLC, we have all these stop points. So green light number 1, do you want the exam? Green light number 2, are you prepared to pay? Green light number 3, we read our films on Monday, Wednesday, Thursday in the mornings. People make freshest decisions in the morning. People do things that have deliberateness and proclamation of appointment in the morning. Everything later in the day, in most situations, now there's always exceptions, but in most situations, by the time you get to the latter part of the day, you're already in sweep up, clean up. So just stop setting up appointments later in the day.
Sweep up, clean up.
Yeah.
I never heard that. 37 years?
37 years.
I heard a new phrase.
So, do you want the exam? Are you prepared to pay? We run a 0 balance practice. You'll take care of it on the way out. Reports of findings. I do them in the mornings. I noticed you're married. Or, I didn't notice that you put down any relationship. Is there a primary relationship in your life? Here's why. In our experience, if we can help you, the things we're going to ask you to do are not only going to affect you, going to affect everyone you live, they're going to affect your home life and everyone you live with. So in our experience, for someone involved in a primary relationship, if that person doesn't understand, if that person doesn't have the competency to exercise advocacy for what you're doing, there's no sense in even doing the report. So will they likewise be needing an excuse for work, or will they be able to zoom in at the time we go with them? I mean, we're very experienced. We know how to make this work, but people who are in primary relationships that don't have any requirement of that other person know what's going on, are they really converted when they're converted, or have you had them convert and later quit because their spouse really wasn't on board? Or they say they're fine with the exam, they come in and the spouse isn't there, and when you're done with the report, they say, oh, well, I got to go home and talk to my spouse now. Why did you bother that exam? Why did you bother all the minutes, moments in that exam? Why did you bother all the minutes, moments, hours on the file, on the write-up, on the line drawings, on the diagnosis, on the thinking of a plan of care and a plan of treatment? Why did you bother? You wasted your life in those moments if you could have cleared that up ahead of time. So conversion happens at the beginning of day 1. You're converting on all these agreements. There's many moments of conversion, many seeds that lead to the great forest that will bestow the shade and the moisture to grow a life for people who want to dwell within it. It's a beautiful story. So that's just day 1.
Well, I'd like that you're bringing up the multiplicative events that are happening that lead up to conversion.
They're all conversions that lead to conversion.
We just did a leadership camp and we talked about being a change agent and how there's little steps that happen with big priorities. So each of these little steps that happen in day 1, if they're attached to a big priority about initiating a lifelong relationship with someone, then there's an opportunity for change.
Let me ask you, Dr. Jen, you are brought into the middle of a multitude of situations that always end up being relational situations where people's lives are not in agreed conversion. The conversions that they think they had are disassembling, and divorces are happening. Kids are embittered and they're moving out, they're crashing cars, they're defying their parents. There's
avoidance
of issues, avoidance of communication. We're just not going to talk about it, or we don't talk, period. We need 3 months of silence to get past it. I mean, you constantly deal with this stuff, and you might say, what's this got to do with new patient conversions? We attract conversions with patients at the standards that we require conversions in our important relationships, I think. Right? I mean, what do you say to that?
Well, I love that statement, which is really true, that we attract people based on what we're projecting out. So if we are a person or a people that are living our lives by standards and by accepting that there are criteria for acceptance of conversion, then we're going to attract people that appreciate the systems and procedures and the structure, and they're going to choose that. But if we are a people that don't have systems in place and there's no structure, and we change policies day to day by patient, and we're driving the CAs crazy because the criteria are changing, and it's very elusive how we're determining a converted new patient, then that's not a sustainable model. And it's not sustainable in our individual lives, and it's definitely not sustainable in a practice to be healthy, to have longevity, to be decades in chiropractic, and to raise up other
So it almost
doctors.
sounds like the conversation you're having suggests that functional clinical conversion of patients for long-term agreements to change their lives with deep, significant actions is something to assess almost in every living room of a person's life.
Absolutely.
How big is this conversation going to get?
Right? And it's really exciting because it applies to the most significant relationships that you're involved in.
Well, you and I look at people that we love, that are our dearest friends, and they're constantly running after fires.
Yeah, well, people, I mean, in general.
People in
Yeah.
general, running after fires. And it's like, if we convert a household to have standards of longevity, long-term conversion, then when conflict happens, which it always will, even in those moments, we don't completely derail the things we converted our convictions to. You know, you never miss team trainings. Even if you're on the road, you might do them, you know, remotely for the sake of your team, but you don't, missing's not an option.
No.
You know, not doing is not an option. So patients come to you and they bring a situation, and hopefully you're going to help them convert. And for most people, we're talking about day 2, the patient reported findings. And I would say right there, we have to agree what means they converted. Well, if they converted, they're paying with dollars. They're paying with commitment to pay dollars. They're paying with commitments to make appointments and spend time. And they're paying with commitments to do certain things, have energy and investment and behaviors that they have to take home and work on. So it's time, energy, and money commitments that are made. And for you and I, we make sure the commitments are put in a pecking order, because most people always go to the lowest common denominator. Well, what's the bottom line? What's it going to cost? A lot. You have to make a commitment to time. Right, but the money, there is no money. There's no money to talk about if you can't talk about time. So Mrs. Jones, this is going to take you 18 years or 18 months or 6 months. Whatever it is, there's no money to talk about till you can look them in the eye with stone cold sober eye contact, and they completely say, yes, I see myself committing to X months of work. Your care plan may be 1 month, your care plan may be 1 year. I'm not telling you what your care plan should be. I'm telling you that the evidence will be, all right, that if you aren't proclaiming it with clarity, and if it's not a stretch for you, right? You go to the gym, you want to stretch, you need to work out with something that's going to stretch you, be extra hard. If you're not giving a time frame in a care plan that is a recommendation, that is a stretch for the patient, a stretch for you, are you really going to grow greater competency without stretching in that? So there's a time agreement, and there's a frequency agreement, which has to be some version of a stretch for them. There's an intensity agreement. I mean, that's what leads to conversion. Then after all that, there's the money agreement. So how do you start to help a chiropractor sort through conversions, appraisals of their own life?
You start with a big priority, and you take little steps. And you do it in connection with a community that supports you where you are and challenges you to what's next, because people's lives are at stake. So I love this conversation. I think there's a lot of great application. I know that we went over a lot of different specific parts of what are the criteria in the TLC community for a converted new patient, and it takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
You got to train really hard.
So to answer the question, if people hadn't made a agreement to time, an agreement to frequency, an agreement to what you put in the category of intensity, then we don't need to talk about the agreements of money. But each one of them does lead to the other, and money must be agreed to upfront, and money must be properly understood throughout, and money must be understood regardless of third-party payer. But these people are converted, all right? So I would love to dig deeper with you. If you're in TLC, you know exactly what we're talking about, and you probably recognize that from a conversation like this, you're able to be more deliberate at looking at your own living room and be patient. I mean, that's my hope, that you don't get more frenetic or anything in this. You actually look at it and go, it usually takes a minimum of 3 to 5 years to sweep through a practice and begin to really remold the pottery that we're using as vessels for our feedings, right? So 3 to 5 years, so there's no rush, but there is demand to dig deep. And the way you do it is you keep working on things. And I think the closing thing I'd like to talk about is everyone needs to be in this dialogue, because the most devastating moments I see in a chiropractor's life that I help is when, and I'm saying in TLC, let alone outside of TLC, the most dangerous and downtrodden moment is when a chiropractor starts to get a little successful. It's as bad a moment as when a patient starts to feel less pain. Because most of us, our old behaviors are just a slice below the surface, ready to come right back. And we start missing things and missing phone calls and missing opportunities to be together at events. And we miss things, and before you know it, we're not living examined lives. All right? We're living check-the-box lives, right?
Yep.
So, got to show up.
Yep. Show up, connect, engage.
Fun.
Thank you for watching, and look out for our new episode in just 1 week.